โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนัมมัสสามิ Blessings. Good evening. Those of you in Melbourne will be aware that we just had yet another storm, trees falling down everywhere. One thing you learn living in the forest where there are a lot of trees is that even though sometimes they do fall down or branches fall down and occasionally they damage things or even people, in most storms most of the trees don't fall down, which we're thankful for. In life, often we focus on what goes wrong and make a big thing out of it. And of course, it's not always wrong. We need to learn from things that go wrong, problems that arise, suffering that comes up. We do have to learn. And that's often how we progress and become smarter as human beings, isn't it? Learning to solve problems and deal with problems and suffering that comes up. But at the same time, sometimes we have to be careful that we don't just focus on what's wrong and what goes wrong and the problems or the trees that fall down, or not only on those, because we shouldn't forget that the majority of the trees didn't fall down. The majority of people are probably relatively unaffected. I know a lot of people lost power and still have lost power, but we have to learn how to look at the world from a place of mindfulness and develop our skill in discernment, wisdom. This is how the Buddha taught us to look at life, ourselves, others, and the world around us, so that we don't get lost in the biases of the mind, lost in wrong views or incorrect views of the way things are. So yes, of course, trees fall down, but then many trees don't fall down. More trees don't fall down than do fall down at any one time. So we have to keep that in mind. There's the pain of life and the difficulties, but then there's also the good things. And if you only notice the pain or the difficulties or the problems, then you'll tend to forget the good things. Similarly, some people, perhaps a less amount, I don't know, but some people always focus on the good and deny or ignore the problems, the bad. That's probably not right either. The one amazing thing about the practice of mindfulness, bringing your attention to the present moment, to whatever you're experiencing in the present moment, is that mindfulness is a great leveler out of experience, or evens out your experience, so that you don't, when you're mindful, you're not giving too much value or importance to one thing or the other. You're endeavoring to be aware, mindfully aware, and clearly understanding whatever it is that you're involved with. So that means a tree falls, You're aware of that, but then you also notice, or can turn to notice, all the trees that didn't fall. You have a moment of pain, but you're not forgetting all the other moments where you didn't have pain. Or there's one problem in your life over here, and that's maybe important at that time, but at the same time you can also be mindful of all the other aspects of your life where there's no problem, or little problems. So Ajahn Chah used to say, when mindfulness is present in your mind, in your practice, then it kind of gives everything equal value. Because mindfulness as a quality of mind brings you this quality of equanimity, keeping your mind in the middle towards different experiences. So you're not falling down into the extremes of aversion or craving for and delighting in things, or averse and against things. You're knowing things as they are, but you're not stuck in one extreme or the other. You're knowing things and seeing them really as of equal value. So Ajahn Chah said, happiness is on one side, suffering is on the other, but when you're mindful, they're of equal value because they're just experiences that you're coming to know with mindfulness, with wisdom. So it's obviously a very mature place to be in your mind, in your practice, but it's what we aspire to. And this is what the Buddha practiced. If you ask, what did the Buddha practice? We practiced developing mindful awareness of the way things are and not attaching to pleasure or pain, suffering or happiness. He was developing mindfulness, and he did develop mindfulness to the point where he just knew things as they are. And this is why it's useful for us to keep coming back to our regular practice of meditation and reflecting on the Dhamma, listening to it and then thinking of it and reflecting on it. So you're coming back to this place in the middle where true peace and happiness lies. When we leave our mindfulness, which is understandable with the pressures of life and the different things that come up and the distractions, the danger is that our mind slips into one or the other, attaching to pleasant experiences, pleasant objects over here, or attaching to the unpleasant over there. The reaction may be different, but it's an attachment and it's causing suffering. Even attaching to pleasure causes you suffering, because when you lose it, you're not happy. You're not getting what you want anymore, so you're not happy. So sometimes people would ask Ajahn Chah, and they say, so you're, as one who's well practiced, you might say in code, so you're enlightened, you've attained Nibbana. What's it like? What's the mind of one who's attained Nibbana like? And Ajahn Chah might answer, he could answer a few different ways, but he might answer, I haven't attained anything, I have nothing, I'm not anything. There's nothing to be, there's nothing to have. In Thai we say, Mai mi arai. When you're not seeing the truth of things, then there is something. There's something to be, something to have, someone to be, something to hold on to. And that's why we suffer. So the mind of the enlightened one, they say, doesn't hold on to anything. It's free of clinging, free of delusion. So it doesn't identify with anything as me, mine, self. So you could say that mind, maybe it notices the trees that fall down and the problems that causes, but then they equally notice the trees that didn't fall down. Ajahn Chah, like many forest monks, talked a lot about trees, because you live in the forest, you see trees every day. Well, of course, it stays in your mind. So he used to compare Buddhism, the Buddhist teachings, to like a tree. You know, you look at a tree, we have that saying, you can't see the tree for the leaves or whatever. Looking at a tree is a practice in itself, getting to know trees. Because if you only see trees occasionally and you're not that interested in them because you're busy with all kinds of other things in your life, well, you tend to just have a very superficial kind of glimpse at a tree and you think you know a tree, or the sort of brown things with green leaves. But if you live in the forest, you tend to look at trees. You can't help it because they're all around you and you notice them if you're seeing them every day. So you get to know them just like you might to get to know a person. You get to know their shape, their height, the colours, the textures, and so on. So Ajahn Chah used to say Buddhism is like a tree, so you've got the bark on the outside, and that's like the externals of Buddhism, the external parts, the ceremonies, the rituals, the chanting, they're coming together to do various kind of activities as Buddhists or people who follow the Buddha. That's the bark. The superficial part, you might think not that important, but it has a role to play, doesn't it? Because the bark protects what's inside. Inside, the first layer is the sap wood, the sappy wood where the moisture of the tree is and where it travels upwards. So that's why a tree can grow and survive, is because it pulls moisture with nutrition up from the earth. It goes up through the sap wood, the soft part, which needs the bark to protect it. So sometimes Ajahn Chah will say, well, that's like the practice of meditation. Meditation is the constant cultivation of particularly mindfulness, but also many other skillful states of mind that mindfulness supports and is supported by. And the way the Buddha taught is that, that one moment of consciousness, one mental moment in our life is actually made up of different characteristics and qualities. So when you're meditating, we say meditation, and that means many things to different people. Visually it means you may be sitting with your eyes closed or walking quietly back and forth in a quiet place. But what are you actually doing? Well, you're cultivating different qualities of mind. And we say skillful, wholesome states of mind. So developing mindfulness, effort. You have to have some conviction that what you're doing is worthwhile and good, so you have saddha or faith, and you develop qualities that arise as the mind becomes more calm with the presence of mindfulness, where you develop rapture, contentment, happiness, and one-pointedness. So the practice of meditation is cultivating many useful, skillful qualities that support each other and kind of arise dependent on each other. And that's constantly flowing back to our citta, our consciousness, that which knows. So just like the sap of the tree is constantly flowing upwards from the earth, taking up moisture, nutrition for the tree to grow, the leaves, the branches to grow. Meditation is kind of constantly drawing up these wholesome, skillful qualities, producing them, developing them, cultivating them. So the sapwood and the bark on the outside, they're vital parts of a tree, even though they're actually, by weight, by volume, they're quite small. The biggest part of the tree is the heartwood, the solid bit in the middle. That's what gives the tree its strength, keeps it standing up, and lasts the longest. So in Buddhism, the Heartwood is compared to wisdom, insight, because ultimately what is it that frees us from suffering? It's the uprooting of craving and attachment to wrong views, attachment to the sense of self, attachment to our senses. And wisdom is what frees a person from suffering. So it's compared to the heartwood of the tree, the inner strongest bit. So in terms of a practitioner, it's how much your practice may be measured by how much wisdom or insight you developed, and that's what frees you from suffering. So you have the heartwood, the softwood, and then the bark. And that's what makes up Buddhism. Some people never get beyond the bark. In the West, many people don't like organized religion. They don't like rituals, ceremonies, the paraphernalia. They don't like chanting, Pali chanting. They don't like statues. They don't like merit-making ceremonies and so on, which is understandable in a sense, but perhaps also they're not yet appreciating that part of that role, the role they play, those things play in Buddhism. You could say, yeah, they're just like the bark, they're just the superficial, external part. Some meditators say, I'll just meditate, do my vipassana, develop insight, and I don't need all the rituals. Well, there may be a few people who can get by without much bark. But even the biggest, most powerful tree still has bark, as long as it's alive. And the rituals and the ceremonies and the buildings and the merit making and all that, it has a role because it brings people together, brings some structure, and it gives life, in one sense, to the Buddhist practice. Because if you didn't have any of the externals, you just drop them all and say, I'm just practicing for insight into impermanence and not self, emptiness. Well, you can say that, but to get to that point where you can say that, you still rely on a certain amount of bark in your life. You need the texts, the teachings, you need sometimes to be introduced to Buddhism through ceremonies or meditation, chanting, they all have a role to play. Particularly for bringing people together, to practice together, to provide the means by which the teachings can be handed from one person to another. So that's why we have monasteries and a hall where you come together and meditate. That can provide a basis for teaching and practice for maybe many generations. So you do need some bark. And we've all relied on some of that bark in the past, even if we tell ourselves or other people, I don't need any of those rituals. If we're honest, we probably would admit we've benefited from them in one way or another. But it's the bark, so it is the outside, and you don't have to make a big deal of it. Like when you practice Buddhism, you don't really have to make a strong commitment. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to join. It's not a cult where you sort of come in and then you never leave. It's really more organic than that. And it's just being interested in the teachings, the practices that the Buddha gave us, and putting them into practice. And like many Buddhists say in the West, they reach a point where they say, well, if I was to say I have faith in any religion, I'd say Buddhism. But don't call me a Buddhist, because they don't like the name of organized religion, and organized religion often has a bad name, scandals and problems. But maybe they're secret Buddhists, and they say, oh, well, if I was to believe or say that I follow any teaching, any religion, then it would be Buddhism. Some people are more strong than that, and they just say, yeah, I follow the Buddha. Why is this teacher I've ever encountered? Why is this set of teachings and practice I've ever encountered? That'd probably be my place in it. I have no problems committing to Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha and practicing. I certainly can't see anything else in the world that comes anywhere near it in terms of value for a human being to find peace and wisdom and free themselves from suffering. But that's my personal opinion, personal experience. But the bark, it has its role, and in a tree, it still needs the bark. So we do have that side of Buddhism. What happens if you lose the bark? A tree dies, doesn't it? Like here in the forest we have deer, and if you know anything about deer, once in a while they have horns, antlers, and then when they're getting new horns, they drop their old horns sometimes, and then they get new horns and they get itchy heads. So they like to find a tree to rub their head on. And because they're creatures of habit and they follow the same path through the forest every day, they pick a tree, which is their scratching tree. And poor tree gets scratched by one or maybe more than one deer every day, and they rub and rub and rub as they walk past. They stop rubbing for a while and you hear them rubbing, making a noise in the forest. And they may move on later, but gradually they take the bark off the tree and the tree will die. So then you get ghost trees, these trees that shouldn't have died, but they do because all the bark has been taken off. They say ring-barked. And the deer has killed the tree. It probably didn't intend that, but it's just all this rubbing takes the bark off and the tree dies. So it becomes a ghost tree, kind of grey, white, just sitting there. And then it's exposed to the weather because the bark is gone, the leaves drop off, it dies, and it loses its strength. So by losing the bark, eventually the heartwood collapses and they fall over and you hear them crash over one day. So even a big, huge tree with strong heartwood, thick, some of these gum trees, they're hundreds of years old, they still require their bark to stay alive. So Buddhism still requires the outside bit, the ritual, the ceremony, and that's why we do chant in Pali. We have the text, the suttas, the Vinaya, the Abhidhamma, we have our rules and practices, we keep precepts, and all the things that sometimes people find off-putting, they're actually quite useful for us if you get into them and learn what it's all for and why. Keeps things going from generation to the generation. Of course, you can get obsessed with them, so some people just get stuck on that, of course. Too much ritual can be very boring or very superficial or frustrating, because sometimes people just feel that's enough, that's their practice. They do their bit of chanting, but they don't do anything else. They come to the monastery, they make a donation, and then they go away and they don't do anything else. So they can go away and do very unskillful things. And that happens, people, they go in the morning, make their donation, feel good, they've made their merit, and by the afternoon or the evening they're drinking or gambling or arguing, or they're not interested in precepts, they never meditate, they never listen to the Dhamma. They go, when they go to the temple, they say, "Can you give a short talk?" because I'm busy. They don't want a long explanation, because listening to the talk is more just a ritual. And that's enough for them. They don't want to go deeper into it. So they just stay on the level of the bark and never go through that to the soft wood with all the nutrients, or to the hardwood with all the strength. They don't meditate, they don't cultivate their mind further than that. That's a problem as well, because if people aren't deepening their practice, they just do a ritual, make some merit, do a donation, say a few words, get their blessing, but don't do more. Well, they're not really preserving the Buddhist teachings or understanding them. And that can be a problem sometimes, because people can do that for years and years and years, like just playing around with the bark for years and years and years, and then they feel they're Buddhist, they know Buddhism, and then someone comes along maybe who's deepening their practice, but the first person doesn't realize that because they've never done it, and they can't appreciate what meditation brings, the values and the wisdom and the peace that it brings, perhaps. So people are on different levels in their practice. Some are on the level of the bark, some get through to the Sap Wood, so they start practicing meditation. And they develop some mindfulness and some states of calm, some inner joy, happiness. And that's much more sustaining than just the bark, but it's supported by the bark. So if you do develop a regular meditation practice, I think you'll find that does bring you a lot of inner peace, steadies your mind, improves your mindfulness, and gives you this ability to be more mindful, steady your mind in the midst of the ups and downs of life, the storms, the trees that stand, the trees that fall over. You can be more aware of the whole picture of things when you're more mindful. Your mind doesn't get stuck in the biases of greed or aversion, jealousy, fear. And of course, any insight that comes from the meditation goes to widening the hardwood. Like if you ever see a tree, when it's cut down, it has the rings of the hardwood, which tell you how old that tree is. Those rings usually refer to, they're like a sign of a year's growth. So however many rings, that many years your tree has been growing. That's like rings of insight, the wisdom, the understanding you get from doing this meditation. You get experience, learning to bring up mindfulness and then contemplate and develop discernment. It's a training, it's something you have to put effort into, but it brings its result. Your mind becomes firmer in the practice of developing wholesome qualities. Sila, samadhi, panya, mindfulness, patience, faith, effort, compassion, wisdom, understanding. And your views on things start to fall in line more with Dhamma, with the truth, rather than being based more on your preferences or your moods. When we haven't developed much mindfulness, our mind tends to be quite weak. It's prey to its moods. So if you like something, you say, oh, that's good, I like that, I want more of that. And you spend your life trying to get more of the things you like, and your view is that those things are good, and they're good for you, and they're right, and we should have more of them in the world, depending what it is you like, and everyone's different. And then the things you don't like, don't want, well, we should get rid of them, we should destroy them, get rid of them from the world, and then your views form that way. So you have your preferences, what you like and think is right, what you think is wrong and bad. If you haven't got through to the inner wood of the tree, then you remain on that superficial level of just following your emotions, your moods, what you like, you go for, what you don't like, you try to get rid of. And you'll miss out on the chance to have that experience of the heartwood, the steady, firm mind that is seeing things clearly from an unbiased, unattached place. You never get to that if you never sit down and look at your mind and get to know yourself. Another way of looking at meditation is just getting to know yourself. What makes you tick? What are your preferences? What are your likes and things that you like and want in this world and think are good? Your values? And what don't you like? And what do you think is really bad and try to get rid of? Often we have, a superficial idea of who we are, what makes us tick, what we think of, what we hold up in our mind's eye as important. But often we haven't investigated very deeply. Often it's a very superficial holding to a view, and that can change very easily, based on meeting other people or our different experiences. Our views on things change. But if we never sit down and pay attention to ourselves, we never know. So when we practice, sometimes it's quite difficult getting to be practicing mindfulness and then becoming more and more aware of yourself. It's nothing very far away, just becoming more aware of what goes on under the surface, what we call our subconscious. You start to reveal things about yourself as you meditate that you didn't really notice before or that you didn't admit to. But the Buddha's path of practice is all about getting to truth. And especially in the beginning, truth can be a little bit unpleasant or confronting, so you have to go easy on yourself, go gently as you're opening up to the truth. And this is why the Buddha encourages us to practice mindfulness with goodwill, compassion, and developing these wholesome qualities to support our personal exploration. As you practice more mindfulness and discernment, you have to be ready to see the good and the bad and the ugly. That takes a bit of both time, effort, and constant looking and observing. In the time of the Buddha, the monk who was considered foremost in discernment, in wisdom, is Venerable Sariputta. And he became enlightened one time when he was attending on the Buddha. If you ever go to India and go to the Buddhist holy sites, there's a cave. They call it the pig's cave, or the pig herder's cave probably. Just down from Gitchagutta mountain, where the Buddha had a dwelling place on top of the mountain outside Rajgir. And there was a cave you can still go to and sit there today. They say this is the cave where the Buddha gave his teaching that Venerable Sariputta became enlightened. And Sariputta was there. He'd obviously been practicing for a while before that point. It wasn't starting from zero. He had a foundation in sila, samadhi and panya. The tree was already established. The bark, the sap, the heartwood was already there, but it wasn't quite perfected. So the Venerable Sariputta is there fanning the Buddha, in attendance on the Buddha. And I think it was his cousin or his nephew came. They called him the Brahmin long nails, Diganaka. He had long nails. One of the attributes of some religious seekers, they don't cut their nails, so they have these long curly nails. So that was his name, and he came to see the Buddha. And the Buddha was asking him about his practice, his views on the practice, and he said, well, my view is that nothing agrees with me. Nothing. Nothing agrees with me. That's my view. And so the Buddha started talking about this, the problem of attaching to a view. So you say, nothing agrees with me. So that means if someone comes along with the view, everything agrees with me, I like everything, you're going to be arguing with them, aren't you? If you attach to your view and theirs different, you'll argue. Or if someone comes along and says, some things agree with me, but other things don't agree with me, that's my view. Well, you'll be sometimes arguing with them. And the Buddha started to talk about the problems of holding on to a view, attaching to it, just blindly, without reflection, without realizing what you're doing. It'd be quite useful if you had some of this teaching today, the way people attach to their views and suffer because of it. Even the view, the Buddha said, even this view, nothing agrees with me. So the Buddha said, so this view, does that agree with you? And he said, no, even if I like this view, it still doesn't agree with me. He's got his position, so he just sticks with it. So the Buddha then changed tack a bit, and he said, well, look at the human person. Every human being, they have a body, and they experience feelings. What is the nature of a body? It's made up of natural elements, earth element, fire, water, air, come together. But what is the experience of a human body? Every human body, male, female, whoever. Well, these elements are constantly changing, degenerating, aging. They bring us all kinds of problems, with sickness and aches and pains and injuries, very fragile, and they're constantly aging. So it's a hopeless case, isn't it? The human body will eventually let you down. You'll get old, get sick and die. That's the nature of a body. So just led him through a contemplation of the nature of the body. It's impermanent. Ultimately, it's not a self, is it? Because it goes to old age, sickness and death, and you can't stop that, you can't control that. So it's not a self. Nothing you can rely on, nothing you can take as yourself. It's not really a being or a person. These are just superficial labels we put on the human body. Say, my body, but actually it's not true, is it? It doesn't last. It doesn't listen to you when you tell it to not get sick, not get old, not experience pain. And the Buddha went on to talk about feeling as well. Feeling is the same, isn't it? You know, we have pleasant feeling, unpleasant feeling, and feeling that's neither pleasant nor unpleasant, neutral. But that is all dependently arisen as well. You know, feelings arise based on causes. Pleasant feeling has its causes. You know, you see something that you find attractive, it gives rise to a pleasant feeling. When that visual image is gone, that pleasant feeling fades away, it disappears, doesn't last, it's impermanent, it's not a self. So he led Diganaka, the long-nailed Brahmin, through a kind of teaching on vipassana, on insight into the nature of body and feeling, seeing them as impermanent, not self. This was enough to break through his just blind attachment to this view. Whatever doesn't agree with me, I don't want, I don't like. Saying to a point where he's just mindful of the way things are, not from a point of view, not holding to any particular view, but just establishing mindfulness and observing the way things are. The body is like this, it's impermanent, it's not a self. Feelings that we have, pleasant, neutral, unpleasant, are not permanent, and they're not a self. Getting into be able to establish mindfulness and reflect on the way things are. So listening to this talk, he became a stream enterer, Sotapanna. Venerable Sariputta is fanning the Buddha, contemplating the same talk, but he's already well practiced and well on the way to enlightenment, so he became enlightened listening to this talk. It's interesting, it's actually a talk about letting go of attachment to views, wrong views, but this is what freed Sariputta from his ultimate attachments. He'd already developed jhanas, he'd already practiced for a lot, developed his practice well, but this was the final insight that he got from listening to the Buddha. So both of them attained something from this talk. But the Buddha was emphasizing the practice of mindfulness and wise reflection on the way things are. This is the way out of suffering. Not holding to a view blindly, but investigating. Training the mind to investigate the way things are. This is the heartwood of Buddhism, what the Buddha taught. In learning to see the way things are, that the experience we have in this world is what we say, dependently arisen, it's conditioned. And what's conditioned is subject to change. Whatever arises must cease. So a person is born, they must die. You get something, it will pass away. You buy something, it won't last. You experience pleasure, that doesn't last. No pleasurable mind state lasts all day, all night, forever and ever. These are temporary experiences. Unpleasant feelings, unpleasant mind states, the same. So when we tell ourselves, oh, I've been depressed all week because of lockdown or COVID or whatever it may be, we're not really being accurate. Once you establish mindfulness, you start to unravel the truth and you see, actually, you feel depressed sometimes. It comes and it goes. The thought processes, the trains of thought with that feeling of disappointment, sadness, depression, they come and go. The feelings associated with it, whether it's feelings in the body and feelings of tension, aches and pains associated with your negative mind state, they come and go. This is what the practice of mindfulness reveals to us. to our mind, shows us these things we attach to and identify with as solid, permanent self are actually changing according to conditions, both pleasure and pain, happiness and suffering. So what does it leave you? It leaves you with this place in the middle where the mind has mindfulness and is seeing things as they are. This is Diganaka, long-nailed Brahmin. He gets to the point where he can see life is like this. It's made up of conditions, of arising and ceasing, physical, mental conditions, a process of arising and ceasing, you could say. Venerable Sariputta, even further, completely beyond all identification with anything in this world as self. Even the subtlest experience as self, whether it's samadhi, the pleasure and the bliss of samadhi, any insight, anywhere where the sense of self alights or settles is a cause of suffering. He could see that. So he didn't have any more sense of self, mind completely free, what we call nibbana. But as the Buddha pointed out, as Luang Por Chah pointed out, to get to that, we need the bark, the softwood, the hardwood, all working together, supporting each other. Again, when you look at trees, maybe not in the forest, but you look at trees in people's gardens or orchards, you have lots of orchards around here as well. It's amazing, isn't it, how a tree stands there and produces fruit. This is coming into the summer, we're going to get fruit, whatever it may be, apples, berries, different kinds of fruit. Fruit is, not all fruit, but most fruits are quite tasty, sweet, delicious in whatever way they taste, but they're amazing how a tree produces that, isn't it? It needs the bark, the sap, the hardwood, all of those things working, the roots drawing up nutrition, water, and it produces beautiful, nice tasting fruit. Some fruit even has juice in it, that's come from the earth, which you might say is dirty. If you get earth on you, you don't like it, do you? You wash it off, and because the earth is full of stuff. If it's around here, it's full of wombat poo, urine, whatever. The earth starts off like that, but the tree draws it out, and it becomes something useful and even delicious. Like the juice of fruits, or if it's say a coconut tree, coconut milk has come from the earth, but it's become purified by the tree. That's the practice, what it does. You take the raw materials of suffering, confusion, disappointments, despairs, and you turn them into something good by this process of establishing mindfulness and developing discernment. You recognize what suffering is, dukkha, what it is, but then you also let go of the causes of dukkha, the craving, the attachment. So back to trees again, trees at every level can give us a good analogy to the practice. Even when you get a fruit that's damaged, which happens, doesn't it? You get a basket of fruit, there'll always be one with a few bruises. You can cut the bruise out and still eat the fruit maybe. Even when we still experience some pain, suffering in our practice, you can isolate it by establishing mindfulness and say, this is painful, and you know that. Some holding on to some negative view on thought or feeling, but then you see it with mindfulness, you let it go. So it's like, you find a bruised banana or apple or something, well, okay, you can cut around it, you can still get benefit from the fruit. You experience a bit of stress, suffering in your life, but if you establish mindfulness, you can get beyond it, let it go. So wherever we are, if you're in the forest, you learn from your environment. If you're in the town, your environment will be a bit different, but the same teachings apply, don't they? The same principles of practice apply. Wherever you are, you try to develop more mindfulness, to calm the mind so that you can see the truth more clearly, so you don't get fooled again. We write songs about this, don't get fooled again. When we don't practice, we keep getting fooled and we keep suffering, and we don't like it. So this is why it's time to practice. Bring those Buddhist teachings into your life, practice them more. Free yourself from suffering. So maybe I'll leave you with these reflections tonight.